So you got an attorney, and then you got an economist. My God, what's
So
going on? Okay, so my name is Bo Whitney. I'm going to talk today about kind of the economics of cannabis. I have a, let's see here. I have a presentation. There we go. So I'm going to give a broad overview about what's going on in the market globally, U.S., because people are always talking about the U.S., and then narrow it down to Europe and then Germany in particular. Now, a little bit about Whitney Economics. We're a global data and research firm. We do consulting, pretty well known. We have clients all over the world. We're based out of Portland, Oregon in the United States. So, as Bob mentioned, there's this growing expanse of countries that are legalizing either hemp or adult use or medical. The list is just growing day to day. A lot to keep up with. I think the key message here is that even excluding hemp, you've got a large market, you've got a large number of consumers and the like. So in terms of the US, so what my firm does is we gather data in all these markets. We look at trends, we look at ramping scenarios from country to country, state to state, and then we put out projections. And so our projection for 2022 is about $29 billion in the US, and it's growing up to about 81, 82 billion by 2030. Now, in the US right now, this whole COVID surge in demand is over. There was a lot of working from home, or as I called it, working from stone. And they were able to consume more and more because they didn't have to go to work. And so they could work while under the influence. Now that surge is over, and so the pattern, the growth rates and all this in the United States are going back to the growth rates that you saw in 2019, pre-COVID. And so it's kind of normalizing. Where the growth really is in the market is in these new emerging states, such as New York, New Jersey, the more mature markets like Oregon, Washington, Colorado, they've peaked. They're now just basically steady Eddie. A lot of the growth is based upon population growth. And so new markets are coming online, and that's where the growth is, that's where the opportunities are. Now, not every state has the same opportunities, of course, but right now there's this talk about will inflation in the United States, will that impact demand? We're not really seeing that. We're seeing more deflation in products that are going to market. Where we see inflation's impact on the market is when in the startups. So deflation, product pricing, softening of demand due to COVID returns, but inflation, 25 to 40% inflation for construction, for breaking out your dispensaries and that like. So this will have an impact on new markets like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania and the like. Just how much of an impact, not quite sure yet, but it's definitely present, something to be considered. So, EU. So, like I said, we've built these models. There's the total market. Hang on just for a second. Thanks for indulging me. The total addressable market in Europe is right around $63 billion. Now that's illicit and legal combined. Most of the countries are starting to reform, or they want to reform, and they're really looking at Germany to be their guide throughout this whole reform process. But I think the reform throughout Europe is inevitable. Now, who will supply into these reforming countries? Well, our models indicate that the countries that are on the outside, the fringes of Europe, will be the low-cost suppliers into the European Union once things become regionalized. Right now, every country seemingly wants to supply into Europe. So you've got Asia, you've got South America, you've got Africa, but there's only so much market to go around. So when you're contemplating supplying into Europe, be very, very careful about oversupply. Now, there's not a whole lot of data about the European market, but there's more and more insistence by regulators, by member states and member countries to start gathering data so that we can do a better job of predicting what's going on in the market. And so data is a key issue throughout every market seemingly in the world. So 5 countries make up about 62% of the total demand in Europe. I've listed the 5 countries here: Italy, France, Germany, UK, and Spain. But these usage rates and this total market is rather underreported because there's this lack of data. So, for example, my firm is estimating that there's about 37 million consumers. 22 million is being reported by the United Nations. And it could be as high as 150 million if you include a lot of these periphery European countries. So, pretty substantial market. It's the second largest market for a revenue purpose right now in the world. However, Asia and Africa have the most consumers in the world. So it's important to make that distinction. So I want to give a little bit of time on Germany. The post-legalization ramp will capture a greater percentage of the legal demand. So it'll capture more of the demand in Germany than in the US, but less in Canada. And what I mean by that is that by mapping out these ramps and seeing how the structures are evolving and the like, the demand is rather predictable, and the conversion from the illicit market consumer to legal market consumer. And so if you look at it just from a first year, second year, third year, Germany should do a better job of capturing the legal consumer than the United States, but Canada was really off to the races, and so they did a reasonable job, even though they're kind of peaking and stalling right now. And then ultimately, where it goes in terms of Germany and how much legal capture, how much consumer demand it will be supported by the legal market, that will really depend upon the rollout of the regulatory structure. And that's still in a state of flux. But right now, by 2030, there should be about $5.4 billion in legal sales. And so that's pretty significant. 2 billion or 2.1 billion by 2025. Now this incorporates the delay in the rollout, the 2024 start. It seemed, we're predicting that it's going to falter a little bit out of the gate in 2024 and then really take off by 2025. But $5.4 billion, it's a pretty sizable market. And that's not even including some of the demand that's going to come in from Canada tourism. But the key to a successful ramp is based upon access. The more people, the more access they have in stores and retail outlets and the like, the better. And it's easier for consumers to participate if they can go down the street rather than drive 25 kilometers. And price plays a real important role in the amount of capture, because if the consumer feels as though they're paying too much of a premium relative to the illicit market, then they just won't participate, or the level of participation will slow down dramatically. So it's going to take a while to ramp in Germany. It always does, but then eventually they'll gain some traction. So My firm not only looks at the ramps, and that's demand, it looks at jobs, it looks at taxes, but we also have models on supply. And I think one of the often overlooked parts of regulatory deployments is sizing the supply appropriately. It's been mentioned multiple times today that the supply is actually too little even to support the medical market, let alone the adult use market. But based upon the total addressable market that's illicit and legal, the total supply that's required is about 950,000 kilos. That's, hundreds of metric tons versus the 10 to 25 that are in place right now. So as it comes to regulatory deployments, it's really critical to make sure that the country stays ahead of the supply so that it doesn't constrain the market unnecessarily. And so if you undersupply, it can really harm the market by keeping prices too high because it's supply and demand. If you oversupply, prices crash and then it doesn't help anybody. The tax revenues are suboptimal, the profitability of companies are suboptimal. And so it's really important to strike that balance. Now, my models can predict at any given stage how much supply you need to support the demand and support the ramp. So you don't need to supply all of this supply immediately. You have to just, grow as the market grows, evolve as the market evolves. And I don't think there's ever been projections and requirements presented on the German market, especially going out to 2025, 2030. So, this is some, revolutionary data right now. And so we're going to be refining this as we get more and more data. So key considerations for German regulatory. Access and price is key. I can't stress that enough. And collecting and publishing data is also very, very important. Often regulators don't know much about their market because they don't have the data. A lot of the data is behind firewalls, so it's tough to make good business decisions because you don't have the data. So the more data that can be provided to the market, the better, because it helps shape policy, it helps shape business decisions. And it's important to remain flexible from a regulatory perspective because there's a lot of unknowns as these deployments take place. And so understanding what you know and what you don't know is really critical, and being flexible enough to say, okay, this isn't working, let's change it. I think Bob mentioned about the regulatory that you can change things quickly, and I think that's what will happen in the German market for a period of 4 or 5 years after the initial rollout. And I mentioned the importance of gradual supply. And I think the model where Germany allowed for imports, they had some basic domestic supply and then supplemented that with imports. I think that's a good model. There just needs to be a better balance between domestic production and imports. And keep in mind that for regulators that there's an emboldened illicit market. And so they already have they're already ahead of the game relative to what's going on in terms of regulatory deployment. And so for those that are in the industry, education and communication are really key. Constant communications with regulators is helpful for them because they don't know how to regulate this. They've never been doing it before. They may have done it on a small scale with medical, but adult use is a different piece, to say the least. And as a business operator, set realistic expectations with your business. Don't think that you're going to get 10% of the market or 20% of the market when it's more realistic to only say get 2. And know your cost structure. Bob and others mentioned how there's going to be price declines as the market matures, becomes more saturated. We're seeing this in every market. What we're also seeing is a high level of business failures in markets that where they get overextended and their cost structure is turned upside down relative to the market price. And so it's really important to understand the cost structure, understand where the price is and where it's going, and make informed decisions on that, and know where, when, and where you have to get out. If you can't support your business because prices have declined so much, then it's important to know that too, and to make that tough decision. And then it's important also to act local. It's a local issue. Cannabis is generally a very emotional issue. It's important to act local, but it's also important to think globally. Now, 5 cents a gram in Thailand. I've seen instances where it's a penny a gram. I've seen wholesale prices in South America at a penny a gram. In the United States, production costs are 25 to 50 cents a gram. So there's this competitive disadvantage in the United States, and it could be very well in Germany as well. But so it's important to understand the role of competition on a global scale when you're operating locally, and just be cognizant of that so that you're not surprised. We've talked a little bit about hemp. I presented some of this data before on the hemp side. Hemp is a pretty amazing industry in and of itself, and it's actually larger by our calculations than the global cannabis market. In this example up here, there's the global demand total addressable market around $250 billion for cannabis, but just in 10 product categories, taking minimal market share for hemp, that's a $350 billion market. And that's just, those are reasonable assumptions. There's already a presence in automotive, there's already a presence in plastics, there's already a presence in animal feed, and these industries are expected to grow exponentially over the next decade. So I think in some countries, hemp is viewed as a competitor to cannabis, but I see it more as a partner or a complement to higher THC cannabis. And especially when it comes to the ESG side of things, the environmental, social, and governance. On the environmental side, cannabis is a real dirty industry, but there's a lot of plastics, a lot of energy consumption and the like. And so hemp can help complement and support the higher THC cannabis industry by providing environmentally friendly products to help bring those products to market. Plastics is one prime example. And there's all sorts of demand. I don't need to belabor the point, but there's big industries in hemp, and it's a complement to higher THC cannabis. So in terms of predictions, Germany is one of the first major markets out of the gate here, but expect additional acceleration of legalization throughout the EU and beyond. Look for a spike. I mentioned this about Canada tourism. It'll be a novel industry. It'll be a novelty to go to Germany to buy adult use. But eventually that will decline and that will go away as more and more countries deploy their legal systems as well. And prices will remain high at the start, mainly driven by lack of access and undersupply. But prices will eventually normalize and decline. And so the normalization, I think, is something that people really need to build into their business models. So I think, that's about it. I mean, I think the key message here is it's an exciting opportunity, but businesses need to be disciplined. Regulators need to be disciplined. There needs to be an understanding not only of the demand, but the supply as well, and plan accordingly. And it's not an easy nut to crack. very difficult process to go through. But eventually there's plenty of opportunity for successes, not only in Germany, but throughout the EU and beyond. So just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity to speak today. There's some data here for you. We're happy to share it. And I'll take any questions if there.
Let's hear it for Bo Whitney. Anybody? Someone's got to have a question. No? How do you think Bayern Munich is going to do this year?
That's one upstairs.
All right.
Hurry up.
Let's hear it for Misha, who has to climb all the stairs.
Yeah, hello. As you're talking about the potential markets, what is the reason that Italy, like with less people, does have such more potential than, for example, France and Germany?
Yeah, so the question is, why is Italy so much larger than some of the more populated countries? And it comes down to usage rates. So based upon the UN numbers and others, if there's a higher percentage rate, then there's more and more consumption. And so that's what drives the larger market. But one thing to note is that these are pretty conservative numbers. They come from the UN, they come from the EU through some of the studies, but I think that they're underreported. So I think that this would be a good baseline to go by, but the market is actually substantially larger, and the demand and consumption patterns are uniform from not only state to state, but continent to continent. And I'm seeing this especially out of some recently published data out of Uruguay, where 31% of adults have used cannabis in the past year. Now this is well in excess of what's being reported by the UN. So I think, like I said, the amount of consumption and the amount of supply here is very, very conservative relative to actually what's going on in the market.
I don't need the mic. With what experience we have to learn from other countries, what is one hope that you have for Germany to improve the process here?
So the question is, what is the one hope that Germany has for that would spell success in the deployment?
Yeah, what do you think Germans can do better?
Well, I think they've done a reasonable job in terms of deploying their medical program, but where they have the opportunity now to build the infrastructure from the supply all the way up. Most countries build their models and their regulatory structures on the top down, the retail and the taxes and all that, and then they go, oh yeah, now we need to supply the market. I think if Germany sets up the market to where they are cognizant of the supply and prepare the supply, then, because that takes the longest, then from there they'll set themselves up for success and they can maximize the revenues, they can support the businesses. I didn't even talk about job creation, but I think that it all starts with the plan. It's a good question.